Alrighty. All right. Who's ready to get shredded by a developer? This will be fun. So today, and I mean that all in good fun. This is gonna be a good, fun talk. So today we're gonna talk about designing with developers in mind. So we're gonna have question time at the end. So save whatever whatever you want from there. Same thing. Twitch. Feel free to ask questions. We'll check in on them at the end. But this is a talk that I was going to give, and I'll say who I am here in a second. This is a talk I was going to give at UXOK, and that ended up not happening, sadly. So I think I hadn't written the talk by then, but I wanted to still give it because it's something that I've been thinking about for a long time now. I've been a developer for a while, and I've worked with designers for a while, so there's a lot of things that I've learned that make that relationship more effective together, and I'll get into all of this. So before that, I'm Aaron Krauss. I am the code boss on Slack and a handful of other social medias. That's my personal portfolio site, thecodeboss.dev. And these are some of my hobbies. I like tea. You have no idea how deep this passion goes. You can ask me anything about tea. I like making cocktails quite a bit. I enjoy longboarding. I don't do that too often, but I got into it in school, and it's just fun. I think people call it old people skateboarding, and I'm okay with that. And I also like the random hobby of the month. That's something that just every month or 2 months I switch something I'm ridiculously interested in. And lately that has been like cooking with cast iron. I just love it. It's a weird thing. But that bottom pan I cooked eggs on. So if you think eggs can't be cooked on cast iron, they can be. All nice slidey eggs, waffles or pancakes on the other one. So that's been my hobby. You wouldn't have thought cooking with cast iron could be a hobby, but I made it a hobby. So I also run the user group OKC Web Devs. One of my co-organizers, Stephen Vincent, also runs that. And that's where Techlahoma group, just like OKC Design+Tech, a handful of people here have been there before. But if you haven't, check us out where you can find us on Meetup, probably the same way that you found this group. And we have a lot of fun. It oftentimes is developer focused, hence the name, but a lot of times it's not. So if you're not a developer, don't think that you can't attend this. You can speak. We've had many speakers that are not developers, and it's, there's so many things that are developer adjacent, like creative, like project management. There's so much. I'm also pretty heavily involved with Coffee and Code. That's OKC Coffee and Code. Kimberly Collins runs a lot of stuff there, and like Grant mentioned, there's a meetup for that this Saturday, and this is more just lax. We just have socials, meetup. It's fun. You can find out a lot about these events just in the OKC Metro channel on Slack. I work at a company called Clevyr. That's where we're at. We do software consulting. I work there with Adrian and Grant and some other people back there. And we do software consulting. We have local clients, national clients. I'm a developer for them. We have a full in-house creative team with design. We have project management, of course, sales. We're about 50 people or so we've been growing quite a bit. And it's a lot of fun. We do we do a lot, and we try to keep up with the latest trends, and we try to keep up with that intelligently. You don't want to do the newest thing if it hasn't been vetted and is like not the smart decision. So we try to stay modern, but intelligently modern. Okay, back to this talk, designing with developers in mind. But first, I really want to go through and give this little short blurb about the developer code of ethics when working with a designer. This is going to be tongue-in-cheek, so bear with me here. But when you're a developer, who here, I'm not going to call on anyone, so it's safe to raise your hands, but who here as a designer might have worked with other developers before? All right, good. Oh, like who has worked, like as a designer, who's worked with developers before? Awesome, yeah. So you know kind of some of that relationship. It's, we collaborate so closely together, and it's almost like a sibling relationship there. That means we like, we love each other, but we also butt heads sometimes, right? So this is kind of in the spirit of that. So developer code of ethics, when working with a designer, this is something that a developer has to say that I will abide by this when I work with a designer. And there's 4 things. The first is even if you don't want to, or even if you don't have to or even want to, you must always deviate from the original design. You all as designers can build this beautiful concept, this beautiful picture. We have to deviate from that. It's part of our code of ethics. We just have to. So whenever you think, man, the developer really messed this up, that's why. It's part of our code of ethics. We can't avoid it. Number 2, at least once, this is from the developer side, at least once say we can't do that, or even better, I'm not going to do that. You might have just put something together that is beautiful, and I just won't do it. I might not even give you a reason. So, and again, it's not me. I have to do this. It's part of the rules. Number 3, we always want to get the project 90% close to being done, to the original design. But after that, we just stop and say everything is going to take too much time, and we just don't go any further. And again, don't get mad at me. It's just how the game works. It's how the ethics work. And then even if it won't, like even if it doesn't take too much time, we still just have to say it will. So, and last thing here, we never can admit that we don't know something. You know, we've got to keep our ego, right? So we just say it's impossible, even if there are plenty of examples that already do it. So when your developers say it's impossible, again, just know this is why we have to do that. So that's the developer code of ethics when working with a designer. This is just, if you didn't hear about it, this is a real thing that every, thank you. Whenever we graduate that boot camp or get that college degree or just take that course, we sign this, and we're beholden to this. Okay, now that that's out of the way, back to the actual talk. This is the last time you'll see this slide, I promise. Unless it's at the end, I don't know. So why have this talk in the first place? So I've worked closely with designers since about 2014, so coming up on a decade there. And we like to blame each other, right? Again, we depend on each other, but that doesn't always mean it's a love-love relationship. Like, it's very common for developers to say things like, man, design made this way too complicated, and designers to be like, look, they didn't listen to me. This is what I gave them. Why didn't they do this? And again, to a degree, I get it. Like, usually in design and dev, they don't happen together a lot of the time. Usually, design happens first, and then that gets over into the dev world, and it's almost like a here, it's your problem now kind of mentality, or it's like, it's your problem, but then give it to me when you're done, and then I'll do it. And that usually means there's no collaboration. Like, it's kind of like design world, now it's developer world. Design builds this vision of perfection. We'll kind of get back to that. But then development decides how to implement it. And that's just, without collaboration, you can get somewhere. Like, this is how the world works a lot today, but it's not ideal. We can do better. Success Kid says we can do better about this. So that's kind of why I wanted to give this talk, is talking about how we can do that collaboration a little bit better. And the core message is I want to empower you as the creatives to collaborate with developers, like the whole step of the way. And the onus is also on developers too. It's not a one-way street. But I want to open the doors so that you know you can do that. So not just while you're designing either, but before and after that too. It's not just, it's a collaborative phase, like the whole thing, like before design, after design, before development, after development. It's all like, we need to collaborate during that whole time. And I'm going to give you actual examples today about how we can do that. So there's really 4 different times where things happen that you as creatives would care about: before design, during design, after design, and then during the development phase where, again, it's kind of you've handed the problem off to the development team. There's things that I want to encourage you all to do that will just make this, as effective as possible. And again, it's just there's as much onus on the development team as this. It's a two-way street here. So we'll kind of go down this, and we'll go through some points here. So we'll start off with that pre-design phase. And there's 2 points that I've got with this. So point number 1, you need to review the scope together with development. This is like the beginning of everything. Before anyone's done any work, you get a request from your boss, whatever that is, a list of requirements, a meeting or something. You start to know what you have to do. And a lot of times this can be something like a contract, like some kind of written thing, a statement of work, pretty much just a contract, or something less formal like a list of requirements. If you work at a product company, this is probably what you get because it's probably less contractual work. But somehow you get a list of things that you need to do, and it's pretty common to start doing your creative stuff off of that. Before you start, bring in development and just say, like, look, this is what we have to accomplish. Let's just talk about it so we can just have that conversation first. So just point number 1, talk about the scope with development. Number 2, diagram those UX flows together. This is not UI flows. Your creative is obviously the leader of the UI side, but more than just the creative side can work on the user experience side. And we've been doing this at Clevyr quite a bit. So this is just an example flow right here, but it's just a workflow diagram. It's like an activity diagram. This might not look like how your company does diagrams. That's okay. This is just an example. But however you do your UX flow creation, include like your lead developers in this project. The team who is going to be implementing this, like, include their like top level person so you can talk through, because what happens is This becomes important for development too, because your developers need to know the scope of everything. We talked about scope already. This is highly important for them, and doing this together is imperative. Again, just as an example, I was working with Adrian and Grant on a project that we have some new development on. It's a new project, and I'm doing some development right now on it, and they're doing some creative work on it, and this is the first step that we really did after we know that list of requirements. We map these out together, and that just gets us all on the same page so that I know I can start to expect what the UI might look like, and I'm not going to be surprised and be like, whoa, this is totally out of budget for what we can accomplish, and he doesn't have to be depressed when I tell him that. So this just, and again, this isn't anything super complicated. We have a starting point here. We have a box that goes to another box, like an action. We end up going to a decision here, yes or no. It goes here, another decision, and eventually we get to an end state here. So it's just, and really this is how developers think too. It's just, it's if-then statements, right? This is logical thinking. So building these together is incredibly imperative for just success of the project. And all this happens before that design, right? So this is the concept called product design. So it's pretty common to have that position, product designer. So you might think that as a creative person, like, oh, you should be the one doing this because it's product design. And that's, I get that. But the concept of product design is it's product design. It's not like, it's not focusing on the UI or anything at this point. It's not even focusing on the UX. It's just the product itself. And really, that's what everyone is trying to do, right? At a company, especially a product company, we're all building that product. So it's very important to have the right people involved in just determining these things. Okay, so, which I think I just said this. So it incorporates design and development teams. You can incorporate more teams as well, but that's at a minimum. This is like, you want the creative and then like the implementing team to do that. So kind of just a summary of pre-design. This one went pretty quick. The design phase will take a little bit longer. Review your scope together and diagram those UX flows together. So again, notice those two words together there. The whole theme of this is just collaboration. Like bring in the development team early. And that same onus goes on the development team to keep the creative team a part of the dev process too. Like we have to work together on this. Okay, design. Let's get into some actual core things that you can take away from during the design phase. You're in the midst of building your UI, your mock-ups, your clickable prototypes, whatever those things might be. Point number one, review, again, we're just getting more into collaboration. Review those major design decisions with the dev lead. What I mean here is when you started designing some flows, some pages, keep them in the loop. I'm not going to spend too much more time on this because it's just in the same vein of collaboration here. But this one's pretty easy. Just keep your dev team in the loop there. Number two, this is a bigger one. This is what I'm going to call stateful design. This is probably an actual task that you could take away with to kind of know how developers think about things. Stateful design, maybe that means something else in the creative world. I just made this term up because I'm coming from my head, so I don't know if this means something else. But what I mean by that is, oftentimes when you're building mock-ups, when you're building flows, there's a significant focus on like the success path. And what I mean by that is like if we go to, let's go back a couple slides to that. This diagram right here. Like, this is a good example. Like, it's like a nothing can go wrong kind of path here. Well, like this, I know we can't really read that. It's pretty small, but restaurant waiter responsibilities. What if there was a responsibility of inebriated customer comes in? Like, that's not a success situation. But as developers, we have to account for all of it. So what I'm getting at is, as creatives, we need to focus as well on not just the success path. And really in development, what that ends up meaning is we have to know what to do when things are in different states. And those states really end up being these four common states here. Like before you do the thing, while you're doing the thing, like a loading state, when the thing has a problem, like an error state. So think of like a form you're filling out whenever, if I have validation errors, that's a pretty good example. And then a success state, of course. That's the one that we all know about here. But some examples of this are, like, look at this page right here. It's a mobile page. I don't have any blog posts yet. Well, if I got a mock-up for this, I might get a mock-up of this, or I might get a mock-up of a page that just has blog posts listed on it. That's kind of the success path. Well, if I didn't have this, then I might just think, is it an empty page if there's no blog posts? Like, what do I do when it's an empty blog post? But giving me something like this gives me an indication, okay, you want imagery here, you want text here, you want the ability, you want a call to action here to add a new post, and obviously you could do it up here at this plus, but again, this just lets me into your mind as a creative, and I don't have to wonder, like, what do I do in this situation? So this is that initial state. Let's jump to like a couple error states here. So pretty simple thing here, like we get an error, and I just, there's none of these are going to be super pretty. I just kind of Googled for different states here, but we have a message here with an icon and a retry. I might assume that we should show the user some kind of error, but I might not know how you want it shown in the UI, and I might not know a retry. Like maybe I can assume you want that, maybe I don't. Maybe some actions do want to have a retry, but just kind of knowing ahead of time that this is an experience that you want to prioritize, we're going to get to prioritization in a little bit, is very valuable. Another error state here is a pop-up. Again, it's just a different situation. You might think an error state is an error state. We don't have to worry about it as much, but there's so much to what you want the user to do. We want to error gracefully, so in this case, we have a modal. Do you want a modal? This might be a modal, or it might not be. We have a modal here. We have some options here for just what you can do. And again, the options, what they are not necessarily important, but it's just what do you want those call to actions to be. I might just pop up a message that says, couldn't load the data for this visual. Maybe that's what you had in mind, maybe it's what you didn't, but being able to account for these kind of states, the stateful design, is wildly important for development. And we'll kind of get back to that. You don't need to do that for everything. Every situation you don't need to design like loading states, pending initial states, error states, but for some of them you do, and we'll kind of get a little bit later into where that comes into play. Okay, number 3 here, gloss over the right things, and this is important. This is another one of those actionable things that we really want to convey, and what I'm trying to get at here is you don't have to design everything. So imagine we have a website, a portfolio site. Let's say it's like 50 pages, and the same page template is reused quite a bit. You don't have to design every instance of that page. But there's some things that you should always design, and I'm going to show some examples of that. So you don't have to design 10 of the same page template. It's kind of the example I was giving. Screens with minor differences. Like you can convey those differences somehow, but if you're giving me 5 screens with like relatively minor changes, probably don't need to waste time on that, because unless you want to, unless there's valuable reasons to do that. But as a developer, like I'm looking for patterns. We're going to see that come up over and over again. And as long as I can identify the patterns, then that's what I need. So don't worry about this. And don't worry about building stateful design for everything. Again, if there's 5 forms on a web page and they're relatively similar, I don't need you to do stateful design for all 5. I just give me one example of it, of how you want it to be. And even if the forms are different, like you can design those because they're fundamentally different forms, but I can take that example that you gave me about those different states and apply that. So we just look for those patterns. We like to build something once and then repeat it a lot of the time. And I think a lot of the creative tools that you're using today, like Figma and everything, really relate heavily with that. So that's awesome. Okay, but what should you design? So those are all things that you shouldn't design. You should design all the different components and widgets, like all the things that are highly unique. We need examples of that. One fun example is at my last job, I was building a site for a school system, a pretty big school system. And on the designs, there was a sidebar. Sidebars are pretty common. And on that sidebar, there was just some text, and it said, sidebar widgets, go here. And I'm like, what is the sidebar widget? Like, what do you want? What is this content? And I was the one who had to like make it up. And again, this is different company. This is like 2015, so just different, the mock-ups I got were on Photoshop, for example, so just different era of how we communicate and collaborate. But those are the kind of things where I will identify the patterns, but I need to know, from the experts, what's the experience that you want the user to go through, and what are the different examples of that experience. So again, you don't need to put a component of this type on every page, but give me at least one example of every unique thing, and we can go from there usually. Again, one example of the various states. So going back to that form example, if there's 5 forms, just give me one example of how it's supposed to look for each of those different states, and that's all that I need to know. And then responsive designs. So a lot of the times, we can usually handle determining how the page is responsive. If it deviates quite heavily, we're going to get to this a little bit later, then of course, show me how it deviates. But in general, if things collapse naturally, then we can figure that out. We're at a point developmentally where we can usually handle all that. And it's more, the emphasis on this is we want you to spend time in the right areas. So, and this is just collaborating and letting you know like where we do need the time spent and where we don't. So last one, I think I had originally said design had 3 points. That was a typo, so we have one more here. And also at any point in time, just to kind of let you know, I don't know if anyone can see this gray bar down there at the bottom, but that's kind of the flow of where we're at in the slides. So if you're ever wondering, like, man, this is kind of dragging on, that's where we're at. So I mentioned developers like to follow patterns, and that's a really big thing. We want you to follow those patterns as well. And again, I think tools like Figma really make that very common. We know you have to deviate from things. Like different UI elements, different experiences call for different patterns, but we really want you to focus on only deviating if there's good reasons. And I have some examples. I forget if it's, okay. So here's kind of an example of where the inspiration for this comes in, this idea of following patterns, but only deviate for good reasons. So for example, a developer might ask, like, why are there 8 shades of gray throughout this application? These are questions I've had in the past. Like, why don't we stick to 1, 2, 3? Like, what's the rationale for this? It's okay if there's 8, but is there a good reason to have 8 shades of gray? Why are these 3 page headers the same, but this one is different? Again, as developers, we look for those repeatable elements because we just want to build it one time. And if there's a good reason to deviate, then great. But this is a question we might ask: is just what's the story? What's the user story behind why this is the way it is? Why does this button open a modal, but the other one takes you to a page? And again, we're fine with the answer. We just need to know why, because if we're going to build it one way, we want to. Usually, when we code things, we code the business logic behind it. So it's less about like do it on this page, but not on this page, and it's more about do it on this workflow, but not on this workflow. So that's kind of the reason, the behind-the-scenes questions that we're getting at. And then the last one, I think, is why is this experience different on mobile than on a desktop? So one example of this is, I think I've seen projects where you have a calendar picker on the desktop, but then on mobile, it changes pretty drastically. And this isn't a mobile app versus a desktop app. This is like a website, just differently how you view it. And see, the secret is development. We have the same code base behind a mobile site and a website. There's no fundamental difference there. We use media queries to detect screen size, and we shift things around based off of that. So we can do organization pretty easily, but when there's fundamentally different experiences and widgets and components, that's where we kind of get, like, what is this the right decision for this? So again, kind of getting back to this designing with developers in mind, those are some of the ways that we think about things. Again, if you need to deviate because of the user experience, that's great. You just communicate that and collaborate, and we'll be gravy. Okay, as developers, we like to find patterns. I think I've hit that point home at least 10 times now. We don't like handling edge cases, and we will handle the edge cases. Business logic has edge cases. You know it, I know it. That's how businesses have competitive advantages. But limit them to make sure we're doing the right ones. It's okay to deviate from your patterns as long as you have a good reason. We covered that. Just make sure you have a good reason and communicate that reason. Boy, I should have just waited to go through these slides, but instead of just talking about it all at once. Okay, so to summarize the design phase, again, this is all mid-design, like while you're building these things. Review the major design flows with your dev lead. As you're building them, just the UI flows. Just do a check-in. Is this what you're thinking when we built the UX flows together? Does this line up with your capabilities developmentally wise? One thing I didn't really mention is, as developers, we reuse a lot of things, but we like to reuse things from standardized tool sets or projects that we might not even have created. So for us to maximize efficiency, a lot of the times we might request, hey, this is the best way that we can work efficiently. It's okay if we have to deviate, but just know ahead of time that that's the case. So that gives us a chance to queue in and be like, okay, like, I don't know how much you care about this flow versus this flow, but this one is 50% quicker for us to do because of these reasons. So you can, by asking those questions and by keeping us in the loop, we can let you know, like, okay, what that ends up meaning is budget's going to get saved. We can deliver this faster. It's all valid stuff. Diagram those UX flows together, those workflow diagrams that you saw. Gloss over the right things. And again, I just want to hit that one home one more time. I know it's phrased kind of weird, but the idea with that is you don't have to design everything. And that's the part that you can gloss over, but there are some things that we do need you to design. So if it's something repeatable, you probably don't have to design it over and over again or copy and paste it on different pages. But if it's unique, then do. We need to see all those unique elements. And then just follow patterns. Again, that's just, the deviations happen. Business logic is kind of messy sometimes, but that's developers think about repeating, how we can reuse things, reduce, reuse, recycle, right? Okay, moving on to the post-design phase. So we got post-design, and then we're going to talk about the dev phase after that. So our 2 points here are, we're going to review the designs together. Again, everything is collaboration here. At this point in time, you have built the designs, and they're about to go hand off to developer. Secret, there probably is ideally no handoff. Ideally, we stay collaborative the whole time, but handoff is meaning developers are going to get them. So review them together. We do this a lot here at Clevyr when creative, on a typical project for us is where creative builds the mock-ups, and then we start working on development. Again, that challenges collaboration, but there is a right way to do it, and the right way that we do it is when the mock-ups happen, as well as during, we have meetings with our, with the dev team and creative teams to figure out, okay, this is the flow. Let's talk about how this is. Let's go through what you built and see what's the rationale behind this. This works very well for developers. Yeah. And number 2 here is express what is ultra important and what isn't. This kind of gets back to that gloss over the right things bit, but it's more prioritization. So at this point, again, you've designed everything. And the point about expressing what's ultra important and what isn't is, we'll talk about this during the dev phase, but some of those developer code of ethics things I was talking about, those do, there's real reasons why some of those things, those memes kind of happen. And one example is, there's a very good chance that your designs aren't going to be the final product. And I know that just has to probably feel like a slap in the face, but there's reasons behind why that is, and we're going to get into all those. But right now, we'll just say business reasons. Time, budget, availability, there's reasons why that can happen. So what you can do as a designer is to express what is super important that you need for sure in there. And then also, when you say that, kind of give me something that's not as important. So let's kind of look at this example right here. Mobile app here, it looks great. And let's just say, as an example, for a fact that this appears to be like a left-right gesture swiping day picker. Let's say for a fact that that's a core user experience type thing. The client wanted it. That's just the most efficient way to get to a certain date. That may be, it might not be. I'm just using that as an example. So you're prioritizing this, but then you tell me, but let's look at this graph here. This particular item up here is expanded a little bit. I don't really see, based off of this design, I don't really see a reason for what that means. I can't tell what that means. So maybe you can tell me, okay, we need the pie chart, obviously, but maybe I don't care as much about if this is bigger. Maybe it means something, maybe it doesn't. And then maybe you don't care about this hollow donut in there. Again, maybe you would, but just as an example, kind of telling me, prioritize this. If given the choice, prioritize this. I don't care as much about these particular things on the chart. And that really helps me as a developer to make sure that I'm prioritizing what is most important on your end, because we try to prioritize everything, but business gets in the way. Business is messy. So there's sometimes reasons, there's usually always reasons why we have to have this conversation. Basically, it's either you decide that or we decide that, and that's kind of where some of that butting heads can come from, is if we don't talk about that. Okay, so we're done with the post-design section. To summarize that, review designs together, again, just collaboration, and then express what is ultra important, and then what isn't ultra important. So this last phase is the dev phase, and this is, you might think, I'm done with creative, developers doing their thing. Why do I need to be involved? And of course, at this point, hopefully I've instilled that, want of collaboration, but what do you think you can do during this phase? And really, it's a lot. It's quite a bit. So point number 1 is, if you change the design, make sure you communicate that. I've had instances in the past where we have been doing development and design in tandem, and we'll build something on a page and then look at the design the next day and it has deviated, it's changed, and it's kind of well, there goes an hour, 2 hours, whatever that might have been, and it's just, it can be frustrating, and there's onuses on both ends of that. If I would have known that there was a potential chance for deviation, I could have asked. Designer could have told me, but point being is, if during the development phase, if you change something, we're going to see it. So just communicating that, like kind of when that's happening is wildly valuable. Number two, check in with the dev team, right? This seems like it's kind of standard, but you totally can and should check in with the dev team during development. It's not just like a handoff, here's your task now, I'm done with this, let me pick up my next project. You should be involved for as long as the development's going on. Not as much as a developer, obviously you're not the one developing it, but check in, weekly meetings, stand-ups. And the reason why this is valuable is requirements often change during development. Like clients change their mind. It's a thing, it happens. Whether your clients are internal, external, timelines change. There might be a conference coming up that they're like, oh, this would be super cool if we could get this in here. What can we get done by this time, this conference, we can demo this. And that shifts priorities, right? That shifts scope a little bit. So things change all the time during development, and that means we have to deviate from the design oftentimes as well. So that's kind of answer number one as to why we oftentimes deviate from design. This is usually always the reason requirements change or just something is changing. So when that happens, though, know that you can play a role in determining that direction. So kind of that example, hey, we've got a conference coming up, or client does. We want to show off some of this stuff. We can't show off everything. The product's not done yet, but what can we show off? And let's say we're like a month out from that. Well, should development be the one deciding that? We're building it, and if we do that, we might just think, this is what we can build the most in that time frame, whereas the real answer might be, this is what's going to be the most effective use of our time in that time span. This is going to have the most marketing impact. And as creatives, like you are more likely to want to be able to weigh in on this. It's a team effort. We both can, but we definitely want designers to be part of that conversation. Okay, number three. So know that designs won't identically match the final product. I alluded to this one, and I know this one's a tough pill to swallow. It's kind of like the meme of all designer-developer relationships, right? We just willingly ignore certain things, but that's usually not the case. I would say it's never willingly ignoring it. There's reasons why that happens, and I always come back to this Plato's theory of forms, and we're going to spend a tiny bit of time on this topic. So if you'll remember back from high school, like history or that one philosophy podcast you listened to over the last 5 years, you might know a little bit about this. Probably not, because I still don't know much about it myself. But the idea behind Plato's theory of forms is that there's a separation between the abstract and reality. And the idea is that there is this form, which is kind of this perfection, and that's like the abstract. But reality never quite gets there. Like reality never quite gets to what that form is. And then one example of this is, let's look at this triangle. It's a beautiful triangle. It's a perfect triangle. If I asked everyone to get out a piece of paper and draw a triangle, it's not going to be as perfect as this one. And that's kind of the example of the split of, this is an example of the abstract. It's a form. And what's reality is what is actually happening. And that's kind of, I think about this a lot with creative and with design. And I think, this may not be like the right way to think about it, but I almost think of design as being like this perfection, this kind of thing that like as developers, like we can't always reach, because it's just like, it's a point in time. It's like the thing hasn't been built yet, clients haven't changed their mind yet, but this keeps coming back. And this is kind of the reason why this happens, why development oftentimes does have to deviate, is because it's kind of it's the implementation of the vision. So, and really what this comes down to is that we have designers and we have developers, but typically what trumps all of us is business needs. Like, how do we make money off of this thing? How do we keep our clients happy? How do we stay in business? All those things. And again, business is messy. There's no, you can't expect what it's going to be, and that changes things, right? So that's kind of why development changes frequently, and that's why that collaboration is super important. It's never like a handoff from design to dev, because I'm sure you've looked at products that you might have designed in the past that, when you look at the development side of things, you might think, okay, this is not what I designed whatsoever. I'm sure that happens all the time, and this is an example of why that starts to happen. So what that means, all these things are examples of business changes. Client adjustments, deadlines, budget, resource availability. Like these all factor into the development phase and the design phase as well. It's just typically the development phase is substantially longer than the design phase. So that's kind of why it impacts that phase a little bit more. So these hit hard, and they, we just have to collaborate through them, communicate with the client, communicate with us internally. It's a lot of collaboration. It's a lot of communication. So all that said, like on all of this stuff, but especially this, the devs have a responsibility to communicate like when that happens. Like if I deviate from the design, just like if you change the design during development, like if I deviate, then I have to communicate that to you. Like and that's a problem, right? Like you've probably not been communicated with when development has decided to change designs, and then you see the end product, and you're like, what is this? This is not my vision. So it's on us to make sure that we communicate that as well. Again, it's a two-way street. This whole thing is a two-way street. So summary of that dev phase there is if you change the design, communicate. It's okay to do that, like during the development phase. It's just make sure we talk through it. Check in with the dev team throughout the time, because decisions change, things change. We have to adapt to that. And then just, the sad truth is that the designs won't identically match the final product. And again, just know there's reasons behind that. And I think knowing that gives you the ability to prioritize what you know needs to be there, and then what you want in there but might not be as prioritized. Those are the kind of things that we as developers care about substantially, because we've got timelines, we've got budgets, we've got expectations, and when we're dealing with changing scopes, just like you do during the design phase, we've got to be able to pivot, and that means pivoting on design decisions as well. Okay, to kind of recap everything, we talked through pre-design phase, design phase, the post-design phase, and then the dev phase as well. And again, I know there's like so much emphasis on this phase right here as creatives, as designers, but really, if we can collaborate through this entire thing, that's just so powerful. So I think that's it. Thanks. I am Aaron, and I'm the code boss. Thanks so much for coming. I will open it up to questions. Not quite yet. We'll do the applause. I know Hannah's getting super excited in there. Okay. Yeah. Does anyone have any questions over anything? Shout out on Twitch too as well. Yeah. Yeah, so very good question. And yeah, question was, as a UX person in the field, you get builds from developers that have problems, they have issues with them. How do you really communicate that and really tell them like, hey, focus on the work, like pay attention to the details and everything. And really what that comes down, like you can obviously communicate that to them if it's something directly related to whatever the feature might be. Then yeah, communicate that however your normal communication paths are. But if it's something like, hey, I asked you to add this form field or add this form, but I noticed like some colors you chose didn't match the color scheme or something, like maybe that's worth communicating there, but maybe it's something where it's like, okay, this happens often. Like let's have let's chat with like, your boss, for example, and be like, look, I'm running into this problem often enough that it's like something that I don't really know how to address. What I would suggest from there is hopefully your boss or manager would say, okay, let's chat like with the lead of the development team or so, or whoever's kind of on that, and just focus on, okay, what process can we put in place to handle these these types of things? Because what you're getting at is it's less of a you messed up on this one time, and it seems like it's more of a reoccurring type thing, or just like you're not focusing on these things. So what I could see that then getting to on the dev side is maybe it's like a test suite that gets written to make sure that certain things don't pass. Maybe it's like make sure that you abide by these standards that the design team has created, like these style guides. And as long as there's a policy in place, then you're getting into, then you have an answer. It's kind of like, hey, you didn't follow the policy here. Like, I have a factual thing that says you didn't do this, so like, there's no question. Like, you have to go back and do this. It's when it's vague, like kind of what you're getting at, that the problems can happen. And it's communication and building processes, which take time. And it's not like an overnight thing, but as you see more of that helps so much. We've been getting into a lot of processes here at Clevyr, and just collaboration processes, our business processes, and we've spent years on them, and we're still improving them. But it's just, it's nice when you can look back like every month and be like, we're a little bit better this month than we were last month, and the next month say that again. And it's not a race to the finish. It's just like a step in the right direction all the time. So great question. And yeah, same thing on Twitch if there's anything.
I have a comment, not so much a question. In support of like creating designs that are not art when it's developed, it's not going to be identical to the design. I think it's important as designers that if you have an understanding of the structure of how something is built, whether it's through HTML, CSS, or it's a web app or mobile app, whatever, if you have some sort of baseline understanding about saying like you have to actually know how to build something, but know how it's structured, and help you make a better educated decision about designing. And those would be easier replicated in development.
Yeah, spot on. So yeah, being able to know, as a designer, kind of being able to understand how some of the development works. And I'll just go and advocate for the development side. The flip side of that too is knowing the tools you're using as designers. That helps so much. And again, that world is converging quite a bit now. I think Figma's even got like a dev mode where you can export things. And I don't know as much about that. I know Grant knows quite a bit about that, so I don't know if that's like a yes, we should use it today thing or not. But still, it's going in that direction. And we've all heard of topics like accessibility, and really what that kind of stems from is just rich text that you can tag and highlight, and that's what HTML is, right? So like accessible designs and accessible dev like all relate to those kind of core things. So the tools converge quite a bit. So for example, as a developer, like it's helpful for me to know like why would we use certain image types? Like, something to a designer might be like a no-brainer, like why would we use a JPEG or a PNG or an SVG? But if I can know like, okay, I want this image to like dynamically be able to expand without losing quality, so I know I need to ask for an SVG versus like, just give me a JPEG, and then I get mad at you because it has like a background, and you're like, that's what JPEGs do, right? So having that kind of insight a little bit on both sides is really, it's definitely a highlight of collaboration. So great comment, Adrian. Well, cool. Alrighty, well thanks so much everyone. This has been a blast to talk about, and I'm excited to be here, so thank you. And if you want to get started building some